Wow. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the May Speaker Series. I'm very happy to introduce Angela Espinosa, who I have known as a good friend and colleague for, I think, now over 30 years. We've worked together in both Britain, where she's been on the faculty at Hull, and in Colombia, where she has had various roles, either in government or academia. Or as a contractor. We've been together in VSM applications and also in integrations. So I can say, though, that among the VSM practitioners, she is probably in the lead with respect to applying the VSM to sustainability issues, and particularly with populations that are indigenous or outside the mainstream. And in NGO settings. So I think we're in for a very interesting and informative lecture, and I give you over to Angela.
Thank you, Elena. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, is it, can you see now? Yep.
Yes.
Right, well, first of all, thank you, Paul, and everyone for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here and to share with you. I'm going to be talking today about my new book that is called Sustainable Self-Governance in Business and Societies, the Viable System Model in Action. This is a book that I made in collaboration with several of my students and research partners in consultancies. And basically what I'm going to tell you is like the way that I understand the VSM and the way that I have tried to clarify the original theory from Stafford and the way that it can help us to understand better issues of sustainability, not only viability, but also sustainability, and in particular governance. As you all know, Stafford was one of the pioneers cyberneticians, and several of the first cyberneticians had a big influence in him. Norbert Wiener, Warren McCullough in particular, and Rosa Ashby. Von Förster, very close friend of Stafford, Maturana and Varela as well, Bateson as well. So I think that all of them in many ways influenced the way that he ended up describing and understanding organizations. We all know Stafford's main contributions to system thinking and cybernetics was the definition of the viable system model. And I think that we have all heard the stories about the CyberSyn project in Chile that made him also very famous in 1990, 1971, 1973, when Allende was president, and he created this dream, really cybernetic dream of how could it be a completely democratic and decentralized society operating with a very sophisticated and effective governance system. Stafford's idea, Stafford's, as we know, he took the idea of the viable system model from the developments that Warren McCullough have done about explaining the way the brain works with the human body, with the organs in the body, like a neural network. And then Stafford took this analogy and translated this into a model of a complex organization. So for Stafford, the way that he described a viable system is like a neural network kind of organization, capable of independent existence, so it's self-referential, self-organized, that co-evolves and adapt, and is capable of doing agile decisions and being sustainable, self-governed. So what I'm gonna do is I am assuming that most people here know the theory. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sort of clarify the emphasis that I do in this book. Before I continue, well, I did the book because I've been teaching and practicing the VSM for the last 30 years, since I graduated in my PhD in organizational cybernetics in Aston University in England. And I had the privilege of being very close to Stafford and Elena and Raúl Espejo and having the enormous advantage of learning and being able to discuss many of the applications and the attempts to put this into practice with him. But for all these years I've been practicing, one of the criticisms of the VSM is that it is a complex language that people doesn't understand it, and that is difficult to apply. And by teaching it again and again and again, I think that my intention was to produce like a textbook that was easy to understand and easy to put into practice. So what I'm going to give you is like a kind of generic idea of what the book is about. We all know Stafford's main books when he published Brain of the Firm and the Heart of the Enterprise, and then the second edition of Brain and Diagnosing the System. These books are still a Bible for most of us who are spending our life trying to understand and put this into practice and hopefully continue developing these ideas. But even though many people still haven't understood completely or been able to practice the VSM extensively, the next generation of cyberneticians in organizational cybernetics practicing and teaching and developing these ideas, we have people like Raúl Espejo, Marcus Schwaninger, Fremont Malik in Switzerland, Maurice Joly in England, Alena, Jose Perez Rios in Spain. And then there is like a new generation, the next generation. I mean, that next generation with people like Martin Piffner in Switzerland, Patrick in England, Wolfgang Lassoll in Austria, Mark Lambers in Germany, and many others. But what is interesting is that it's really in the last 20 years, and in particular the last 10 years, that the VSM has become more and more popular. All of these people, especially the ones in the bottom, have been publishing new books. We have a lot of new books in the VSM, so mine is definitely not unique. Each one of them with a slightly different emphasis, but all of them very complementary to each other. So in the book, I explain concepts like requisite variety. For me, the most important aspect of the VSM is that for me, it's the only systemic theory that explains in detail and in depth what does it mean to manage complexity in organizations. And it explains the concept of variety and complexity that Ashby explained, and von Förster, and many of the pioneers. And then how understanding variety in their interactions between an operational group that produces products or services in a particular business and the environment, and managing variety in the relationship between operations and management is fundamental for understanding how to design an effective organization. Stafford explained in lots of detail in his original books the 5 systems. No, he talks about the 5 systems like typology of roles and functions that must exist in every organization for it to be viable, and it explains the criteria that we need to use to redesign an organization or to design an organization so that it complies with these characteristics of the 5 systems and the interactions between them. So in the book, I explain, trying to put it in simple words, no, what is our systems 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I put emphasis in explaining it not only from the point of view of the original theory, but trying to clarify how, if we incorporate ideas of sustainability as well, what does it mean in terms of the 5 systems and the interactions within the 5 systems. The idea of the VSM that it makes it very unique is the fact that it is a recursive model of organization. As Stafford said, every viable system is contained in a viable system and contains a viable system. So the idea of viability that Stafford portrays is definitely a relational idea of viability, because we cannot be viable on our own. We can only be viable in our interaction with others. And that's an idea that I explore and develop all over the book, because I think that people that may not have understood the original theory may think that the theory is mechanistic, is rigid, doesn't take into account the environment and all sorts of things that, in my understanding, are incorrect. So that's what I try to do in the book. Now, in my understanding of the VSM is a hierarchical model of organization. And that's one of the most powerful aspects of the VSM, because it describes an organization like a cluster of autonomous self-organizing parts which work together for a shared purpose by sharing resources and knowledge. So if it's not a hierarchical model, it's a hierarchical model, because it's a model of a network of networks, no, nested at different levels of recursion, no, and operating in an effective way in the way of interacting with the environment. So that, for instance, for me, is one of the mistakes that some people have placed. So what I'm telling here is a little bit like a summary of my personal journey in developing and applying the VSM in the last 30 years. Yeah. This is my previous book. I did it with my husband, John Walker. John as well was a very close friend of Stafford and Elena, who actually met when Stafford passed away. I was coming to England to do a postdoctoral research invited by Mike Jackson in Hull University. And then Stafford passed away, and John and me met in a memorial to Stafford. And John has always been, he also has a PhD in cybernetics, and he's very keen on environmental issues and have worked in cooperatives all his life. So together in the last 20 years, we have been trying to apply the VSM in the context of sustainability, in the context of cooperatives, in more social context rather than traditional business context. And that's our first book that has now a second edition published by Imperial College Book Series on Complexity. In the last one is 2017. And as I said, this is my new book, and this is the book that I did because the previous one was a research monograph. It was a little bit acidic, perhaps. So I wanted to do something that practitioners can see and digest and enjoy in a, let's say, in a language as easy as possible. So that's the book, and I'm going to tell you a little bit what are the features of the book that make it distinctive from other VSM books. The first one is, as I said before, trying to explain what is a viable and sustainable organization. In my view, it doesn't make sense to sustain an organization that could be financially viable if it's operating in a context in which it's been destructive to the environment, or in which it's been damaging for the members or for the communities where it operates. So what I've been trying to do is, with John originally, was to explain a viable and sustainable organization is one that is capable of independent existence without severance from its niche or from future generations which will inhabit this niche. So it should be structural coupled with the niche, can survive with the resources it can access, its products or services are welcomed by its niche, improve well-being of its member and the communities, and preserve biodiversity and resilience of its niche ecosystem. So what I say is that not only an organization should be there to make profit, but to do it, if it's a private organization, to do it in a way that is responsible with the future generations, that is not doing ecological damage, and that, let's say, that is managing the business in an ethical way. And of course, if we're talking about communities or other type of complex organizations like communities, nations, non-for-profit organizations, and so on, then we really need to understand and digest these concepts. Another aspect that for me is fundamental is the idea of managing complexity in relation with organizational learning. The way that I interpret the idea of managing complexity is that you need to learn to deal with complexity as a manager, to deal with, to talk to yourself about whatever, or with the management team about whatever is going on in the organization. Within the operational team, you need to develop relationships, effective relationships in the human sense, or obviously as much as possible supported by good process design and good technology. And then you have to have a relationship with the environment that is a healthy relationship, so that you are not damaging the environment. And the concept of learning teams is for me fundamental, because it is really what we do all the time in organizations is to try to learn together. We have a task, we have a purpose, we want to learn how to do it best. And by doing it again and again and again, if we manage to create a good learning context, the possibilities that organizational learning happen are increased. Another aspect that I go deeper in the book is trying to understand the relationship between systems 1, 2, 3, 3-star. Yeah, in very simple ways, the system 1 is the one that does the job, interacts with the niche, produce the products of services. It has to do it with what I call responsible autonomy. That is, do it autonomy, but being capable of making itself accountable to the meta system. System 2 prevents and harmonizes the systems 1, so it's a preventive role as much as in the sense that we can anticipate the sort of recurrent breakdowns that may arise in the interactions between systems 1, and we have to design mechanisms, communication mechanisms, value systems, and so on, languages, tools, technologies that will avoid as much as possible these recurrent breakdowns. So that's the way I understand system 2. And system 3 for me is the one that will ensure self-regulation, make sure that each one of the systems 1 is capable of independent existence, is in itself a viable system, and to do that has to be self-regulated, autonomous, self-regulated. So system 3 should be making sure that systems 1 are capable of self-regulation and generating synergies among them. And system 3-star will be monitoring operation to sort of awake the consciousness of the meta system when there is something that is going really wrong. And system 3, 4, 5 for me are the home of innovation and adaptation. So while the system 3 is always aware of organizational resources and capabilities in the here and now, system 4 is the one that brings innovation, foster development, and challenges the status quo and the here and now, bringing new scenarios and possibilities from the outside about the future of the organization. And system 5 is the one that is generating closure, closing the organizational loop and dealing with the organizational ethos. From that perspective, I explain in the book a little bit more what I understand that is sustainable self-governance. See, if we see that each one of the systems 1 is self-regulated, self-governed, yeah, and if we insist in that the organization should interact with the environment in a sustainable way, then it needs to develop decision-making spaces that are capable of monitoring what Stafford call essential variables for the viability of the organization, which I say not only for the viability of the organization, but the sustainability in the long term as well. So if we incorporate these ideas of essential variables for viability and sustainability, and we manage to design good, strong, robust governance mechanisms in the interactions between system 3 and 4, yeah, so that we can have the right kind of stakeholders making strategic and policy decisions, having requisite variety to understand the environment, understand the internal environment of the organization, and then being able to make robust and creative enough strategic and policy decisions, and being able to close the learning loops. For example, if we are implementing a sustainability strategy, then how do we create the governance mechanisms to make sure that we create a robust strategy and we take it into practice? So these are the main ideas that I highlight in the book. I've been adapting over the years this what I call the self-transformation methodology that has these stages, agreeing on identity, doing recursive analysis, then doing full diagnosis, then aligning strategy, structure, and technology, then defining self-transformation projects, and then implementing them, and all the time observing performance. In each one of the projects that I have led in consultancy with my students, we've been done adaptations and improvements in the methodology, in the tools. I use it as a learning methodology. That's why I call it self-transformation, because the way that I use it is I try to use the VSM to explain the VSM in simple terms to the participants in a VSM project, so that they can assimilate and digest these concepts. And it is them who are the knowers in the organization who identify what are the kind of pathologies that they are that they have in the current way of organizing, and they can themselves identify transformations that are feasible and important and put them into practice. So that's the theory. And in the book, what I do is I have a chapter in which I explain in lots of detail the methodology, and then I present applications in different fields. Yeah. I start in chapter 4 of the book talking about health. I was writing this chapter while we were doing the COVID. I was very, very impressed by the transformations at the level of individuals, society, and businesses that the COVID was bringing to us. So the first initially in this chapter, I talk about this idea of emerging consciousness or recursive self-governance. That is an idea that, well, Stafford with different words, but Stafford talk a lot about consciousness in a way that he had a big impact on me. And the way that I see is that if we can help that each organization from the individual to the global level, no, can see themselves as a viable and sustainable system, then we can guarantee that it is self-governed, have checks and balance, co-evolve with the niche, develop homeostatic balance with the niche, is adaptive and resilient, and is contained in other viable systems. So this idea of recursive consciousness, I think that is interesting idea to develop. And I try to provide some examples. So I talk, for example, about that was during the COVID, the things that as individuals, the kind of activities that as individuals we couldn't stop doing in the COVID, like going in the cars, going to neighbors, going to pubs, even going to work, seeing friends. So many things that sort of were prescribed, and how we had to concentrate on the most essential aspects for our viability and sustainability. I follow here Alena's pioneering work on the VSM of an individual and Mark Johnson's, and try to interpret it in the context of the COVID, just to see how at the level of the individual we can also use it as an inspiring framework for self-reference and self-governance. Then I present a study that I did with Andrea Martinez, a Colombian PhD student. She did her PhD thesis applied in a cleaning service company in Mexico. And the beauty of the experience that she did was that we managed to design a really interesting learning cycle with this company, in which they identified the sustainability indicators, and they managed to create a way of creating a real-time feedback loop to monitor the changes when they were implementing the sustainability strategy, to monitor how much they were approaching their sustainability goals. So very nice experience, very practical. Then I talk about another experience that's with an MBA student of mine, Kartika Grover. He's a medical doctor in the NHS. He's a breast cancer surgeon, and he invited me and John to do a VSM project in his breast care unit in the trust. That was a really interesting work. He was leading the work, and he had full commitment from people. And for 6 months, we were talking, doing interviews, doing workshops, and identifying the issues that were disturbing, that were the deterrent for the performance of the breast care unit. And we did it as a prototype in this trust. And at the same time, the trust directors invited us to do a similar project that I will mention later, of analyzing the performance of the trust during the COVID pandemic. But this was really fascinating. And as a result, the board of directors were very happy with the results, and they gave us green light to implement fully the recommendations in this unit, and to hopefully use it as a prototype to replicate the experience in other units of the trust. Then in the next chapter, I focus on applications in education. And this is a sentence from one of my students also in Romania, Vladimir Pop. He says we did an application in his school called ELF School in Cluj. And he says the VSM really fits like a glove when you talk about systemic education. I introduced the idea, well, my understanding of systemic education, again, as a relational characteristic of education in which we learn about in our conversations with ourselves, with others, and with nature, and how can we really use these ideas in educational institutions. In the book, I used this. This was a consultancy that I did with John again in 2019. Vladimir Pop was a former student of me in Cluj, and he was fascinated with this, and he really wanted to put. He was the owner of this school. He wanted to put this fully into practice. For a year, we were going every 3 months. We did workshops with the teachers, with the administrators, with representatives from the students and parents and so on. And it was fascinating. And by the end, they managed to sort of flatten the structure. They had a very centralized structure. They were very bureaucratic. But they were a very, very, very high quality school, one of the best private schools in Romania. And they had the capability, because they were private and they owned the school, and they were convinced of this way of putting into practice to really transform the school and create a much more healthier organization, more flexible and autonomous. And that happened just before the starting of the pandemic. So when they during the pandemic, they managed very quickly to shift into online education, and they managed to survive economically and continue their very high quality standards and implement an expansion that they were trying to do, that we were helping them to adapt the structure for this new expanded school. This is a prototype project that we did with a Colombian student of mine, Gabriela Ramirez. She's a school teacher, and she was also wanting to design a new business, a startup that was a systemic education platform, online platform for helping homeschooling and helping primary teachers to provide systemic education resources to their students, to go to work in project-based learning. And I help Gabriela and her team to design the organization. And during the first year, we designed it as a viable system, and they managed to design all the online resources in mathematics, language, social and physical sciences, and graphic design. It was a really nice experience. And by the end, we did an assessment of how the new business was working. And up to that point, that was a really, really beautiful, very, very transformative experience for all of us. This was in Magdalena University. This is a university in Santa Marta in Colombia. They invited me to support them to implement their corporate sustainability strategy. They live in one of the most beautiful places in Colombia, close to Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, where the Kogi indigenous inhabit, and the Arhuacos and many indigenous communities, very, 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 very traditional. And they have this idea of taking care, becoming the lighthouse of sustainability in the region. So they wanted to adapt the organizational structure and strategy to being able to implement that idea. And they've done, we did as integration to start with, in which they sort of clarified their research strategies, and then began to shift the structure to fit with this idea of a sustainability strategy. They've done amazingly well. They are not a big university. They are a public university, not one of the best or the biggest in the country, but is the first university in Colombia that managed to get this certification as a socially responsible university. And they are doing amazingly interesting stuff. Then the next chapter, I talk about organizational networks. I'm very interested of applying the VSM not only in a business, but in a network of businesses, or network of communities, or like a complex social network. Because I am convinced that Stafford, when he designed the VSM as thinking about resembling a neural network, there is no reason why we cannot use the same ideas to design a network. And now in this moment in which we are shifting from hierarchical, classical, rigid organizations into organizational networks with the technology that we have, that now is possible. When Stafford invented this 50 years ago, that was not possible. It was possible in his mind and not in practical terms. So that's a research I've been doing with several colleagues and students. This was a case study in a big project in Mexico, led by Bernard van der Hoop, and he facilitated 100 businesses in Mexico to develop a cleaner, as a network of cleaner production. And for 10 years, that was very successful experience. And then we did a retrospective analysis with the VSM of the network to try to clarify the criteria for design of the network. And it was really interesting work. And then they used the same, the learning from this exercise to design an equivalent network in Colombia, which is now operating and being very successful. This was a work with Alfad Al-Hinai. He was another former PhD student of mine. And he was commissioned by the Omani Broadband Company in 2014. They were creating the company, and they commissioned Alfadal to do consultancy in helping them to design the business. He invited us, and with John, we went and we supported the company to do a VSM analysis. And we came up with a suggestion of a design of the network that they didn't took completely into account. But 5 years later, they realized that the design that we have suggested may be more interesting than the one that they have adopted following Boston Consulting advice or another company. So anyway, and Alpha did another interesting step that was trying to visualize the connection, do a social network analysis of all the communication between these emerging groups of people implementing this new business. And that was a research that I have been doing with several of my PhD students before, but he did it more completely. This was another application that was a consultancy in Colombia in 2012 in a Latin American second generation broadband network. We took the Colombian one, and it had 8 regional networks, and we were commissioned to help them to understand how to reinvent themselves and to strengthen their performance. We did as integration to try to clarify their vision, and then a VSM analysis to try to see how to redesign the organization to move in that direction. Very interesting, very successful integration, very interesting VSM analysis. Here we found a real governance problem, that the regions were completely decentralized and there was no cohesion at the level of the national level. So that was very challenging. And this is another project with Julia Danilova. She was a PhD student of mine here in England. Her PhD was to develop a offshore wind farm project to understand the supply chain network of this wind farm. And she did it just using the VSM to first of all try to clarify the relationship between all the stakeholders in this network, and then to try to clarify the conditions that inspiring the VSM that will be recommendable to strengthen this network and to define a clear organizational strategy. The next chapter of the book, I talk about the sustainable communities. We had a really inspirational experience with John in 2007, 2010 in an eco-village in Ireland, the Club Jordan Eco-Village, in which we used the VSM to support this community to self-organize. They were a cooperative. So for 3 years we were going, and I was really, really fascinated with the possibility of using VSM in communities. I did another project in 2016-17 with Carolina Duque, a master student in Colombia. She's an anthropologist. She was working with the Yurupari indigenous in the Amazon jungle, and she has been doing studies about governance with them. And we decided for 1 year to study their governance system using the VSM. So we designed very participatory projects and which we use ethnographic techniques to communicate with indigenous. They didn't even speak Spanish. They speak their own language. But Carolina had a lot of close relationship with them. So we managed to interpret, let's say, the main issues of governance that they had and produced in expert mode VSM analysis and then translated to them so that they could adapt. And that was a really fascinating experience in which we were seeing the systems one as the different social activities, social groupings of people producing their food, doing the fishing, hunting, creating their malocas, doing the social events, and so on, doing education and so on. A similar experience with another master student of mine, Carlos Duran from Externado University. He was in Colombia also. This was in Rosario Islands in the Caribbean. And he also an anthropologist. He was working with this community, this Afro-Caribbean community. They had been living in these islands that are also a national park with one of the most precious ecological resources in the sea. Coral reefs and beautiful, beautiful marine life, and mangroves, and absolutely gorgeous part of the world. So he helped them to again to understand the different community groups and the way that the governance systems, they are autonomous in the governance of the islands, and they have to protect the environment. So we help them to do the mapping and to understand many of the governance challenges that they have. It was again a very beautiful experience and also very useful for them. Also happened before the COVID. So when the COVID came in, they have already put into practice some of these ideas, and that helped them to deal better with the issues of the COVID. Then in the last chapter, I talk about the VSM for facilitating systemic change. And I do a very brief summary of my experiences in Colombia in the 1990s. That's when I graduated from my PhD. Even before, I was appointed first as the Secretariat of Informatics Director in the President's Office. My PhD was applying the VSM to the President's Office and trying to help to design the strategic information plan for the President's Office. So that was my PhD, and I made a VSM of the President's Office and the relationship with other offices. And after that, I was acting as a consultant for this project called the Social Solidarity Network. I led an academic network of 12 universities called Reunirse. We work with 150 students who went to live in the poorest places, towns in the country. The Social Solidarity Network mission was to fight poverty. And what we did was a very innovative way of monitoring the impact of these programs in the local, in the poor neighborhoods in Colombia. And we did it in a completely participatory way, inspiring the VSM, or my interpretation of the VSM, that is a decentralized, empowering way of understanding development. So we created these participatory decision-making mechanisms and these information systems and monitoring systems inspired in Stafford's early alarm systems, and we managed to facilitate very robust decision-making and very participatory and democratic. That was a very beautiful project. And this one was another big project, the re-engineering the National Auditing Office. I led this project from the beginning till the last year. It was, we brought international consultants. Raúl Espejo was one of them. Stafford and Elena came to help us at some point. Even Hans von Förster came to be with us in one of the events that we did in that project. So for 4 years, we wanted to re-engineer this National Auditing Office. Was very complex, big, corrupt, and inefficient organization. So we used the VSM to reinvent the national auditing, the process of auditing. So we created what we call systemic auditing process that was inspiring the VSM, and we trained 600 auditors in the whole country for 4 years, and we managed to audit 60 big organizations in a in sorry I got to, in Colombia, and we had some impact in the way that the auditing office was working, and that created as well a big precedent in Colombia that over the years, I mean, I created a postgrad and MSc on performance management systems, and I educated hundreds of people. So this project, let's say, was a seed also for further systemic changes in the public sector in Colombia. This and the previous ones. And this was another project that was redesigning the school system. The idea was to rethink the organization of the school system and to create a prototype of what we call the new system, the system colegio completo in Spanish, like a whole school. And we did 2 prototypes into counties, into cities. And we managed to do a whole diagnosis of the educational system, and we managed to invest a lot of money in transforming the education into a more systemic education system with more participation from the communities, with more social responsibility, with more innovation, and so on. This project didn't conclude as we wished because there was a change in the Ministry of Education at that point, so it never came to completion totally. And then there was a series of projects in the environmental sector in Colombia. It started with a Gorgonas integration in 1996. Alena was with us in that integration. We were trying to respond to the question how to organize the public and private organizations and institutions in order to preserve the natural environment in Colombia. This integration in Gorgona we produced a manifesto, the Gorgona Manifesto, that resonated in the environmental system in Colombia for many years after. Yeah, and after that, I did a project that was to use the VSM to create to try to represent the environmental system in Colombia. And we ended up agreeing that the best way to represent it was by ecoregions. So we started to pioneer the idea that was still in the 90s, late 90s, the idea of governance by bioregions. And we did some experiments to create the national environmental system, mapping the different, for instance, in the Magdalena River, one of the biggest rivers in Colombia, to map the different communities along the river basin that belong to different counties, so have different environmental agencies doing the administration of the natural resources, to create a way of networking the ones that share this river basin that was one of the main rivers in Colombia, and share strategies and budgets and information systems and communication and standards around the idea of ecoregion. Very beautiful project as well. I ended the book by coming back to the 21st century a couple of years ago during the COVID, and talk about briefly about this project that was in the same trust that we work with Kartikae, and but this time we were commissioned to do a performance assessment of the whole trust in the performance during the COVID. So what we did was to review the control structure that they have created during the COVID in all the trusts in England and the UK to manage the COVID. And we managed with the VSM to highlight some issues that could be improved to improve the performance in the management of the COVID by basically decentralizing decisions and empowering the wards where the people were directly dealing with the COVID patients, giving them more control on decisions, real-time decisions, and so on. So again, very beautiful. And by the end, what I talk is about the idea of systemic change. This final chapter, what I say is that the VSM is potentially a very, very powerful tool to facilitate and design systemic change massively, no? And I refer to other people who have worked the VSM in the national health system, both in England and, for instance, Schwanninger in Switzerland during the COVID as well. And we can see that there are several patterns of interactions that are common, that if we manage to identify them and pencil them out, we may be able to address more effectively health governance challenges, like distributing specialized knowledge, bottom-up innovations, developing more self-governance, breaking this complete schizophrenia between clinical and managerial criteria that we saw very much happening in the NHS. So to conclude, what I say in the book is that I think that the VSM is more relevant than ever for managing contemporary businesses and society challenges. For issues like crisis management and self-governance, VSM is really inspirational. And it's an approach that you can replicate, as I was saying, to use to design systemic changes in business, networks, public institutions, and communities. And I said that Stafford will be pleased, because I think that he will be saying, well, it only took me 50 years for the time for the VSM to come, but definitely I have the feeling that it is coming, that more and more people are interested. We have this NGO in England called Metaforum. Alena is our president. I've been leading this organization for the last 20 years with Alena and John and others, colleagues and very close friends of Stafford. And we have resources here. We do an annual conference, we do webinar series. We are doing a conference in Manchester in June. And you will find in the internet lots of resources and issues. And those are the references, and this is basically what I wanted to share with you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm glad you put on as the last slide the Metaforum, because in the beginning, I neglected to mention that you had launched the syntegration that established Metaforum, which is the group that is that formed to basically continue and advance Stafford's work. And I should also mention that Metaforum's having a conference in Manchester and excuse me, June 8th to 10th this year, and that everyone is welcome, and everyone is also welcome to go to the Metaforum website and look at all the recordings of the webinars that have taken place that are available on an open source basis. So thank you very much, Angela, for a really comprehensive walk through VSM applications. People often ask, is this practical? Has it been done? And the answer is, of course, yes, but it isn't always well known. So if people want to ask some questions, I think I see one question in the chat to start with, but maybe it would be easier if people would just raise their hands. So do we see any hands raised?
Yes, Jorge.
Maybe just to read the question. Thank you very much for the all these sharing these case studies, and I would like to perhaps dive into one of them. So my question is, if you could elaborate some of the prototypes that you did on the national school system, and what were lessons that you took away from that those prototypes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Yes, with pleasure. Yes, in the national school system, the prototypes were thinking to design a school that was, first of all, more systemic in the way that the curriculum will be not only doing the established curriculum by the government, but we will try to develop more systemic intuition in the students. So we were working with MIT, with the Media Lab in MIT, and we were trying to introduce kind of education working by projects, project-based learning, in which we will ask the kids to design a project, and they will be experimenting with technology, with the support of technology, on different ways of learning. Yeah. So we did that on one side, on the side of the inside the classroom, inside the organization, because it was a VSM focused project. So what we were trying to do was, again, to empower more the teachers and to empower more the headmasters of the schools to be able to create a governance structure that will include the teachers, that will include the participation from the different levels of the school, that will include much more participation from the parents and the members of the community, so that we will be, for instance, enhancing this was most of the public schools, I get that you can understand, in Latin America were with very little resources. So we were encouraging the community to be active part on the school. So for instance, if the police had time and wanted to talk to the children about security, he will be welcome. If somebody was a very good cook and wanted to give cooking lessons to the children, they will be incorporated, and so on. So the idea was to develop local knowledge as resources for improving the variety and the quality of education, and for making the school more belonging to the communities. Yeah. So that was there were all sorts of ideas about transformation that we were encouraging. We were also encouraging, obviously, having more access to technology, to education. We were creating local community centers where in places where the school didn't have computers. In those days, that was 1990s. So to be able to access computers and the internet from the local library. So there were several kinds of transformation projects that we were motivating. We had a lot of money. That was help, of course, because we had the support of the Inter-American Development Bank was supporting this project, and there was, let's say, we managed to support these ideas of self-transformation that the schools who participated were doing. So we were educating them to be creative in the way of creating innovations in the school. We were supporting them financially to be able to make it happen. And at the same time, we were trying to look at the whole education system and identifying pathologies in the relationship between schools and the educational agencies, regional and national, and try to identify, at the same time, to create projects to address some of these structural and technological liabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, did you have a question?
You
I
are
think
muted.
You're muted.
Yes, that's all right now. And still
I think you're still muted.
yep,
Yeah, I was wondering about, and thank you very much for that. I was wondering about your work, if you've come across pro-social world or pro-social, where they use the principles of Elinor Ostrom's governance for the commons, and then combined with a number of other pieces. Anyway, the terms are not coming to mind right now, but they're doing a lot of work in the field, and it's like you're covering very similar ground. And yeah, I'd be very interested in, so obviously it doesn't sound like you've come across them, but using evolutionary biology.
No pro-social, but I have come across Eleanor Ostrom. I met her, actually, and I am very, very inspired by her work. In the book with John, with my husband, in the Complexity Approach to Sustainability book, we have a section in the book in which we made a comparison between Eleanor Ostrom's principles of the commons and the VSM, because we see that the Ostrom, she did the most brilliant work in identifying these principles of self-governance and self-organization that has been in place in many communities about the world, around the world, sharing the commons. And we thought that VSM may be complementary to these principles that she elaborates, and effectively we can see that there are a few principles that the VSM interpret in this way, in this sense, in sense of a governance framework to support the commons, could illuminate the original theory of the Ostrom. So yes, I mean, we haven't done a practical work, but we've done the theoretical work of sort of putting the complementarities between these two approaches. Yes.
Thanks.
Larry had a question too.
I can't tell who's asking the question.
Larry had a question.
Oh, Martin? Go ahead, Martin.
Hi there. Hi, Angela. Thanks very much for that. Lovely to see you and connect up again. And good to hear about the book and the wonderful success of the case stories that you clearly have been having. There's just one sort of issue I'd like to raise with you. It's about developmental evaluation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the literature around developmental evaluation. This is something that Michael Quinn Patton first spoke of in the late 90s, and it's taken off, I think, quite well and substantially, both within the within the evaluation field in social studies, and it's something that I've been very interested in looking at with our systems thinking in practice ideas. So I'm just wondering, with the VSM, how does VSM actually deal with evaluation? I know that the System 3 star deals with monitoring, essentially auditing stuff. I'm never quite sure whether that includes evaluating. And it just seems to me that evaluating, putting or developing value within a system is a key attribute of good contemporary systems thinking in practice. So my question is how might VSM deal with that notion of value systems and developing value rather than simply determining value?
Yeah, well, thank you, Martin, for your question. I like very much your question. That's exactly what we were trying to understand when we did the Reunirse project in Colombia. We spent the first year trying to understand the idea of measuring development, the impact of development, and measuring poverty. And we had to start by rethinking the idea of poverty. We were very inspired in those days by Amartya Sen and Max Neef. And basically what we did was to sort of rethink what is the idea of what is development. How can we measure development in a more humane and more complete way? And based on our understanding of development, that I think is a more systemic understanding of development, we designed the evaluation system, because what Reunirse did was basically design a systemic way of evaluation of development, in which we could be then measuring if the programs, the investment programs that were for development have been successful or not. And the way that I think that the VSM helped us a lot was, first of all, if you think of an organization as complex as a community, yeah, as a viable system, and then you identify the main issues for sustainability or for viability of this community, and you identify the essential variables for sustainability or for viability, then you can focus the evaluation in these essential aspects, and you can develop a way of dealing with the complexity of this community by designing very strong governance systems that will invite participation from representatives from the different communities. So we will invite in Reunirse, for instance, we managed to invite representatives from the beneficiaries from the development projects, the agencies that were implementing the programs, the development programs, the government, the local government that were in charge of the development of resources, the universities. We use the universities to act as facilitators of these really complex conversations between the public agents, the community, and the private agents implementing resources. And we use the students to be the monitors of sort of providing early alarms when there were issues in the way that these programs were implemented. So the way to answer your question more simply, I think that the VSM can inspire us a better way to understand complexity in these very complex interactions and to design governance systems that are more participatory, more democratic, more decentralized. So that's the way that I experience it and the way that I practice it in a context like that.
Oh, thank you. Do I see, Jason has asked a question to me that I'll kind of put forward, which is, which of the projects would you consider to have been most effective with respect to its results? And I would transfer that question with the caveat that if you are consulting in a participatory relationship with people, most of the responsibility after you leave is up to the people who participated. But would you care to address that and maybe address the criteria for what counts as success and how, what the timeline is for judging it?
Yeah, this is always the most difficult question, is assessing the success of a VSM intervention. My approach to it is I think that because I see it as the VSM as a methodology to facilitate community learning or social learning or organizational learning. My response is when I can see that people that have participated in a VSM project have assimilated some of the concepts and are beginning to put them into practice in their day-to-day life, and these ideas change them, and these ideas help them to experience the way of relating to each other and the way of governing themselves. I at that point, I feel this has been successful. But of course, this is very difficult to put in numbers, or even very difficult to try to bring evidence to say, I have had a successful project. Intuitively, if you ask me a question, I will say that the most rich learning that I experienced, for instance, in the Colombian projects in the 90s, this project Reunirse was the best one, with no doubt, was the one in which I felt that there was more learning, more deep learning, and more transformations in the way of implementing public policy. The national auditing process was very successful in theory, in terms of the amount of people we trained and the amount of power we had and the amount of changes we produced inside the institution. But many of these learning didn't transcend to the next government because there was a dramatic change in policy. The new president, a new director of the National Auditing Office was not that interested in this, so that changed. Same with the education project. It changed. There was a political change, and it didn't have the transcendence that I would have expected. So smaller projects, I think that may be more easy to value the effect. Like, for instance, the project in Romania, more recently, that's a few years ago, that was very successful, and because the owner is a system thinker. He had previous training in cybernetics and had the power to make this happen. So we made a very powerful team, and it was a very transformational project, very beautiful project, with no doubt. The Eco-Village project in Ireland was very successful for the 3 years we were there. Over the years, it got diluted, and other ideas have come and other things have happened. And so on. I mean, I could some projects were not successful in the sense that the consequences didn't remain over time. So at that level, I mean, the VSM is like any other systemic intervention, systemic methodology. You can have some level of success. You cannot guarantee long-term success in implementation, because that depends on too many factors.
Yeah, I think, Claire, do you have another question?
I do. Yeah, okay, I'm going to just touch on a few things. You had mentioned the bioregional project you were doing in Colombia. I think that was in the 1990s, maybe.
Yes.
And we're in the middle of, and also the networks, using the VSM model in the networks. And we're in the process of, we're doing basically pulling together groups that are working on the ground in Cascadia, and starting to use, I don't know if you're familiar with some software, but it's essentially this networking software that it's sort of built on a systems thinking model, and also trying to build in the quality of the relationships into that, so that that's also reflected. And what's been really important to us is that we're creating a way of maintaining the transparency of the relationships, but also how decisions are made, allowing people to have a sense of agency. Anyway, my question is just wondering, as we're sort of putting all of that together, I guess I'm wondering how you build in governance in terms of, when we're trying to just create a platform, like the conditions for all of that, but it's emergent. We're trying to make sure there aren't bottlenecks, but I'm just wondering, we are using the software, so that might be one of the places, but just wondering how that would look for an emergent network that we're wanting to support coming together, and it is in the context of bioregions.
Yeah. Well, I will have to understand a little bit more what are you doing, but intuitively, I guess that my answer would be, I do like very much the idea of creating a context for self-organization to happen and for self-governance to happen. Yeah, and at the level of a bioregion, for instance, I guess that what the VSM will suggest in that context is, first of all, to be very practical, to focus on what is it exactly that matters, what are the real things that matters for the network, for the bioregion, so that the things that you need to, like the critical success factors, the aspects of the ecosystem services, or the social aspect of the communities or the industry living there, that you really need to be aware of, because if you don't, there are risks to the sustainability, long-term sustainability of the ecoregion. Those are the aspects in which you need to start observing, being very creative in the way of how can we all be observing this, how can we have hopefully real-time ways of measuring the changes in this, what I call the essential variables for sustainability. If you manage to identify them, and you manage to create a learning team, and hopefully good IT and indicators and KPIs, so that you can see in real time these changes, and you can generate immediate action on these changes. This is like the idea of VSM governance that you can really copy and implement. Is very powerful.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Adler had a comment, which I think is kind of like a question in the chat, which is the comment that what might be impressive to us might not be the same criteria of what makes it impressive to the participants. And it occurred to me that that is basically where the cybernetics of the observer come in, and what the different perspectives of the observer might be.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. The way that I understand the VSM is from the perspective of the cybernetics of the observer. I am convinced that Stafford himself always saw that. I think that is more some critics that have read superficially the VSM that have completely messed up the idea of the VSM sort of being based on an objective way of measuring quantitatively some variables. I don't think it's like that. On the contrary, I think that the the importance. The only way of dealing with complexity in a complex group of people is by allowing the maximum variety of perspectives to be taken into account, because complex organizations, we can never do a precise and complete way of measuring variety. We need to basically depend on the variety, the internal variety, and the understanding of multiple kind of viewpoints. And the only way to observe complexity is by having let's say a multidisciplinary and multiplicity of viewpoints, and being able to summarize whatever raised from the wisdom of the people, basically, not from just a external or observer, independent kind of metrics.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that really is about as close as we can get. And one of the things that I've noticed about VSM is that when people read about it, they see that, what has been done, kind of at the end of the project, but they don't see the negotiations at the beginning of the project, when what's going to be measured is designed and discussed and chosen. I think that's particularly true with the CyberSyn project that was criticized for being technocratic. But what wasn't dealt with was all of the meetings back, before they actually even constructed the VSM, about what's important, what should we measure. And I think that, that gets into, where are we going with this, and can we look at the whole process? Does that make any sense to you?
Oh yes, 100%. I agree with you completely, Elena. I think that what we do with the VSM, I mean, we really, when we understand with the VSM, we understand complexity in a much more down-to-earth way and intuitive way. And when we understand the complexity of a big social system, the first thing that we need to do is to clarify, the different perspectives. Clarify, what do we mean by development? Like in the case of Martin's question, what do we mean by poverty? How do we measure poverty? And these are very complex issues, and unless we have a rich way of addressing these very complex issues as a starting point of a VSM intervention, we are not gonna go nowhere. Yeah, so these are definitely in every VSM project that I have been involved with, we've spent a lot of time in the initial negotiations, in the understanding and clarification of the issues, and in the definitions of who is going to participate, how is it going to be done, as people will do in other system methodologies like boundary critique. We do it completely, and we do it deeply, very deeply, because after that we not only involve people, but we expect people to be able to change their relationships in a very deep and critical way.
Yeah, that also seems to touch on the fact that a VSM application doesn't exclusively use the VSM. Boundary analysis can be used. Socio-technical systems can be used. System dynamics was used in Chile. And a multitude of other techniques that might address a different part of the VSM, and the focus of one of the management functions or one of the recursions. As one of the things we haven't touched on, though, is your experience of the relationship with the VSM to the disintegration process. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, yes, with pleasure. Yes. This is a topic that I've been fascinated about, because when Stafford introduced disintegration in his last book, in Beyond Dispute, I was part of the experiment of the World's Integrity Project, and I led many integrations in Colombia, and I've always was fascinated by trying to understand how the team's integrity is supposed to was invented by Stafford with the idea of how to facilitate the complexity of the 3-4 homostat in a viable system. And I always wonder how in practical terms this can be put into practice. So I've done a few experiments, as I mentioned, like the experiment with the Magdalena University and another experiment in Renata that was this second generation internet broadband network in Colombia. And in these experiments, what I see is that, for instance, you can use this integration to clarify the strategy, the vision, the policy of a particular organizational network. And then you can use the VSM to clarify the kind of organization that need to be in place to implement this strategy. So that's a very simple way of putting them together. Yeah. But there are many other ways. You can do a VSM project to improve an organization and then use this integration to, for instance, facilitate the decisions about the governance issues that the organization need to address, how to clarify the way of implementing a particular strategy, how to clarify, how to design a prototype new business. There are many ways in which integration can help, because integration basically is a very powerful mechanism for facilitating complex conversations between a network of people that otherwise would be very difficult to deal with. So there are many situations in a business that is developing, that is changing, that is adapting, in which dealing with these very complex conversations between system 3 and 4 may need of a particular methodology, and integration is extremely powerful. For those of us who know, integration is the most powerful methodology I know for facilitating complex decisions in large groups of people. So many ways of combining them, definitely a beautiful complement, VSM and Teams Integrity.
Thank you. Do we have some more questions?
We had a question from Larry in the chat.
I'm not seeing it. Could you read it?
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a different form of question. Thank you very much, Angela, for your presentation. It was great. The question has to do with the use of the word sustainability. And I'm just wondering, I'm sure you talked about this in your book, which I have not yet read, but the question is sustainability a form of viability? That is sustainability about maintaining ecosystems as viable systems? I guess that's, I don't know, again, if you could elaborate on how you're using the word sustainability. It's thrown around a lot, people use it in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, but it's a good question, and I appreciate the question. Yes, the way I'm using it, I am thinking about an organization being viable and thinking that it doesn't make sense to just prolong the viability of an organization that is not sustainable in the long term. So I'm using it in the context of every organization should aim not only to be viable financially or economically, but also to be sustainable in the way of doing whatever it does in a way that does contribute to the sustainability of the local environment, of the ecosystems where they inhabit or where they operate, or if they are manufacturers, where they do the manufacturing, and the sustainability of the communities that live there, in the sense that making sure that they are not damaging the health of the communities, that they are implementing their corporate social responsibility by reinvesting whatever profits they have in local development. Yeah, so it's more like like putting the ethos of sustainability as a must in the VSM, in the model of the organization, in the policy, the strategy, the way of acting. It's like trying to progress organizations and businesses into having sustainability in their DNA. It's something that we cannot pretend to be viable if we are not sustainable, because the global crisis is so dramatic. I mean, we are if we don't do something about it, this collectively, if we don't develop more awareness or more consciousness globally, from the individual to the businesses, to the community levels, to the local and regional levels, if we don't do a big step in developing this awareness and this consciousness, we're not going to survive as a species, humankind. So it's in that respect that I say we really need to put this into the DNA of businesses, and my invitation is to do it by clarifying the way that sustainability can be implemented. And I am convinced that the VSM, understood in this context, can be a very good tool to implement sustainability strategy and to make sure that sustainability is embedded in the organization and the strategy in a very clear way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, did you have another question there in the chat? Or maybe, you know, we could talk about that later on offline. But would you like to describe what you're doing in Cascadia a little more detail?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're just in the beginning stages of trying to put that together with, there are a lot of groups that are working separately, but that haven't been connected. And we're wanting to find a way that, that no one group can co-opt the process. But at the same time, there needs to be exactly what you were describing, the monitoring, the being able to set, you know, how do we know that we're succeeding, and how does that feed back into a learning process? So, you know, I would love, I think what I'm really interested in is more conversation specifically around that, on the details of it. And seeing that we've got groups that are coming together and actually having those conversations right now. What I think I'm most interested in is, you know, somebody who's interested in like this happening. It's very exciting that it's happening at this sort of scale. You know, involving multiple bioregions, like nested bioregions within the larger one. So yeah, so just at this stage, sort of those conversations, and at the same time, we're working with global groups that we learn from as we're pulling this together. There are the Great Lakes Basin bioregion that's also learning from the work we're doing, and so there's a kind of bootstrapping that's happening right now. So anyway, it's more just, we're just trying to, wanting to integrate that into the thinking.
Well, I think many of us who are familiar with the VSM would be happy to answer specific questions or see, you know, what we could do to help you find the resources that you need to take whatever it is further.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. Yeah, well, maybe I know I'll be seeing you down in South Africa. Maybe we can have a conversation there, and I'll also have. I mean, this has only sort of been. It's like mostly sort of 2 months old, but it's been going very quickly. This coming together, so. We actually have some stuff now to be able to share and actually ask more specific questions. So,
oh, good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're almost out of time. Is there any final questions? Otherwise, I would just say thank you very much. Check out Metaforum online. And see all the resources that are there available to you for the asking. And thank you, Angela, for all the work that you've done, both with the VSM and to keep Metaforum going so that it's available to people as a resource. And now I think it's time to hand over to Paul and Pile to talk about the next iteration of the speakers.
Directly to Pile.
Okay. I think we are coming to the end of the season this year, partly because of ISSS and taking people away for what would be the next session. So we haven't had the ability and energy to program something for June, and July and August we will be in recess anyway. So we will be reconvening the series in the fall. And I would ask you to send me an email. I put it in my address in the chat. I'm using my personal email because my ASC email sometimes is slow to arrive. And if you have some ideas for what you would like to see coming in the 2023-24 season, please let me know, and we'll discuss that further and see whether you can contribute to making them happen. And thank you, everybody, for continuing in this series. And thank you, everybody who has contributed to it in all the various ways. So have a great summer with lots of good thinking, many good projects, and we'll reconvene in September.
Thank you, Pele. And Paul, any last words?
No, just thanks to everyone for coming, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much, Angela. Really wonderful to have you.
Thank
See you
you,
all soon,
Paul
I hope.
and Bill. Thank you very much, Annalena. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all the projects with us and giving those of us who weren't as well informed a more comprehensive idea about the range of applications of the VSM and how they link to sustainability. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Angela.
Bye, everybody.
Next Sunday.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Bye-bye.